Before start this video, please subscribe my channel and click on bell icon. Thanks.
Many ended up being destroyed beyond repair and later written off. By the end of May 1941, the Royal Air Force had beaten back the Germans, and the Blitz ceased, for a while. In the later years of World War II, the Germans once again raided the British Isles and delivered more deadly bombing attacks. These weren't as extensive as the original raids, but they still killed hundreds of innocent civilians. Today, historians call this second series of air raids the lull or the baby Blitz. Between the two sustained periods of attacks, British civilians were left in terror. They tried their best to get on with their daily lives, but that quickly proved impossible. At night, London's political leaders ordered all lights put out. In this list, you'll learn 10 fascinating, true, and terrible facts about what life was like in London amid Germany's vicious air raids. This is how the Blitz was experienced by English civilians during some of the worst moments of World War II. Related, 10 horrifying World War II internment camps set up all around the world. 10 Minding the gap. When the Blitz first began in earnest on September 7, 1940, Londoners panicked. With nowhere safe to go once bombs were falling from above, they did the only logical thing: they went underground. No, literally, they went into the underground. The underground was only to be a last resort if bombings were happening at the moment, and one needed to find a way to stay alive. But people didn't listen to that directive. Eventually, the London Passenger Transport Board stepped in to assist. But even they couldn't convince shell-shocked civilians to return to ground level while air raids were commonplace. Sleeping on hard pavement tunnel flooring was brutal, cold, and dank. It wasn't exactly a peaceful environment either, with trains whizzing by and people coming in and out at all hours of the day and night. Plus, mosquitoes were rampant in those early months before the weather got cold. And illnesses spread quickly among the people crammed together in close and stressful quarters. The development of more safety and lifestyle protocols within the makeshift camps also spread to the trains. By 1945, many metro trains were re-outfitted to become traveling restaurants for war-weary Londoners. And boy, were they hungry. In addition to the food eaten in the underground, historians now estimate civilians drank about 500,000 gallons of tea down there during the war. Sadly, living down beneath the surface certainly wasn't a party. In addition to uncomfortable and unhealthy living conditions, the constant threat of bombings often came to pass. And the day after that, 64 more were killed when Balham Station flooded following a bomb explosion. Stories like that were constant throughout the Blitz. While living in the underground may have felt safer than being up on top, there were plenty of awful realities to it. But while the vast majority of Londoners tried to get far away from the war being brought to them, at least one man embraced it up close. His name was Dr. Arthur Merriman, and he had been a school teacher in his earlier life. When war came to England, Dr. Merriman joined the Department of Scientific Research. That's because he was a tinkerer with a unique skill set. He knew how to take apart complicated machinery. Learning this, the DSR sent Merriman around to defuse bombs in the name of Britain. Officially, he was working as an air raid shelter inspector. And while he did some of that, his most important job was defusing German ordnance that dropped from the sky. Shopping centers, clothing stores, and high-end retailers were all over. Had the bomb gone off right as it was dropped, most of the West End would have been completely obliterated. Thankfully for London, it didn't explode. Not so thankfully for Merriman, he had to go defuse it as quickly as possible. For nearly 24 straight hours, Merriman wrestled with the 550-pound, 250-kilogram bomb. For the rest of the war, Merriman went around doing the same thing again and again. He wasn't only working in London, either. He proved to be so adept at defusing German bombs that the Americans and other allies started to consult him about their construction and dismantling. Thanks to the former teacher's incredible wartime achievements, Arthur Merriman was later awarded the prestigious George Cross. And Regent Street was saved from total destruction that night in London's darkest hour. During the air raids, London officials knocked out nighttime power all over the city to make targeting more difficult for the Germans. For many criminals, their method of taking what they coveted remained pretty consistent. Whether burglary or mugging, they would use the cover of darkness during the nighttime blackouts to raid what they desired across London. Besides, the police were busy with much bigger problems, and those were just the remaining officers who hadn't been called to fight in Europe on the front lines. Some criminals got very creative with their thievery. Rationing coupons were much desired by most of the general public. Shrewd scofflaws stole them wherever they could. Some even forged them to then resell for pure profit. Elsewhere, those seeking more than their fair share were known to dress as air raid inspectors, wearing special gear for the job. They would enter homes and businesses, fake like they were there on official jobs, and take whatever they wanted. Ambulances were well known to be used as getaway cars too. In the chaos of air raids, criminals would get behind the wheel of the emergency vehicles, flip on the lights and sirens, and be gone in a flash. The worst of these criminals would go right for the dead. In some instances, these were known to rob people who had been killed moments before in bomb blasts. And since London was in a state of near total chaos, fraud ran rampant, too. While politicians set aside money for people to rebuild their homes after air raids, it was difficult to verify who had lost what. 3-7. The Fight for St. Paul's Cathedral. Guardians of St. Paul's aka Guardians of St. Paul's, 1944, London's iconic St. Paul's Cathedral was thought to be the Germans' main target throughout the Blitz. It was, and remains, one of the most memorable and notable places in all of London. During the war, Winston Churchill intuitively understood its importance for British morale. He famously said the church had to be saved from air raids. If it were destroyed by German bombs, Churchill worried, the psychological well-being of British subjects and the nation's soldiers could be significantly hampered. These civilians took turns putting out fires and running patrols around the site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When the Blitz came in the fall of 1940, the watch was reinstated. For days and then weeks on end, locals patrolled around St. Paul's to be ready if the worst happened. On September 12, 1940, just a few days into the Blitz, a huge 1-ton, 907-kilogram bomb landed in the middle of Dean's Yard. Alarmed at the size and worried, but thankful that it hadn't exploded, the watchman immediately called in the military. For the next 3 days, soldiers carefully dug the bomb out of its massive crater. The bomb was big enough to destroy St. Paul's and most of the rest of the few blocks around it, so the military was ordered to keep things as calm and cool as possible. For 72 hours, amazingly, that worked. Then, after 3 days of digging and defusing, a daredevil lieutenant named Robert Davies agreed to jump into a truck and drive the bomb far out into the countryside to be detonated. It was thought to be a suicide mission of its own. After all, the bumping and jostling from the truck ride could have detonated the bomb at any moment. Why not, right? After all, the English know how to do that above all else. Like Dr. Arthur Merriman before him, Davies was eventually awarded the George Cross for his efforts. And amazingly, St. Paul's Cathedral withstood the barrage of bombings for months on end. That's not to say there weren't bad days, though. On December 29, 1940, an amazing 29 different bombs hit various parts of the cathedral grounds. Then, in 1940, thousands of Londoners rushed down into them far underground to get away from the Blitz. Just like those who used the underground, as we've already learned, these new cave dwellers hoped to avoid Luftwaffe bombs by going deep into the ground. As war broke out, the tunnels had been on the property of a local mushroom farmer. At first, he let his neighbors and other locals around Kent use them as an emergency shelter during particularly bad bombing runs. But soon, word got out. Eventually, more than 15,000 Londoners rushed into the caves and set up makeshift homes, beds, and kitchens. Civilians crammed themselves into the full 22-mile, 35-kilometer run of the caverns and crannies. The caves were dank and cramped, but they successfully kept war-ravaged locals away from the cemetery. After the early weeks of the Blitz, cave life became more organized. Of course, that doesn't mean cave life was preferable to what these people had before the war. But it sure beat dying in a bombing raid, and the British showed off their stiff upper lip by making the most of it. Years later, the BBC interviewed Londoners who had shuttled off to the caves during the Blitz. One man was 12 years old when his family rushed down underground. They had just narrowly escaped a bombing raid that killed several of the boy's classmates, and his family couldn't bear the above-ground danger any longer. It was the smell of the chalk, a kind of cold and dank smell. It was horrible. But you couldn't hear the bombs down there. We didn't feel scared, as down there, we felt safe. 5 fighting back with balloons? You may not think of them as a weapon, but they were actually very common above London and other cities. They acted as mid-air obstacles that made it hard for fighter jets to fly between. And they were tethered to the ground with large, thick ropes and metal cables. When a fighter plane ran into one, propellers often snapped, and the German pilots spiraled down to their deaths. The cables were hard to see from far away, so planes couldn't always navigate around them. In total, historians now estimate those balloon cables actually brought down more than 100 German planes during the Blitz. Upon looking into it, they discovered the cause: these loose balloons had come into contact with electrical wires and shorted them out. By accident, these air raid balloons destroyed much of the Danish communications system. Suddenly, Churchill and his men got an idea: do the same thing, but with German military outposts. Thanks for watching. Credits to listverse.com. Please subscribe my channel for more videos.